What is shaken? Welcome to this episode of the Wind Up Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to give it a like and subscribe or follow the show wherever you're consuming your podcasts. You can also follow us on any of our social networks. That's on YouTube, Instagram, the Book of Face, and the social network formerly known as Twitter. The handle on all of those will be at MTGA Wines. You can head to our website, mtgawines.com. Scroll down to the bottom of that homepage. You can fill out the little form there and submit questions, ideas, and thoughts for the show to dive into in future episodes. While you're there, you can also find out a little bit more about us, our wines, and all the goings-on that we have around the country and, of course, here in the Napa Valley. Well, it is nice that there is this amazing community that we get to work with. And if you tuned into the last episode, we talked all about that towards kind of the end of it. Again, I'm still trying to figure out the transitions from one episode to the next now that we're doing kind of these slightly shorter, like more episodic, I guess, type stuff that kind of blend from one to the next because I'm making some more cuts here. But welcome back. We're doing the thing again. We're back to business this episode. We got some stuff to talk about because I've kind of put this off for a little while. You know, we talked a little bit about the news, in March through like the rating system stuff that Michelin's coming out with, the bribery scandal with Southern Glazers that everyone knew about, but no one was doing anything about. We did our little blending session episode. And last week we got into a little bit of the growing season, the challenges that we face as vineyard managers, winemakers, all that stuff, the things that frankly we still don't know about, grape growing and how we're trying to, continue to get better at it. And just how that community kind of rallies around, these points. So that way we have the ability to work together and get better at what we do. But, of course, we got to bring it back down to earth a little bit, right? We're just going to have to. We got to do it. And because the wine business is still, and the alcohol industry in general, is still just in a weird place. It's been really interesting, kind of the roller coaster that we've been on, because as we got through Premier Napa Valley in February, the vibes were high. Everyone was excited. People were, despite the challenges, everyone was very optimistic. There was this just good, times are tough, but we're gonna make it. We're gonna make it. Like people were really rallying around one another, which was really cool. It was very, very cool. And now that, almost 2 months have passed since that time, it seems like it's reverted a little bit. And there is a little bit more of this doom and gloom. And I understand it because it's not like there's going to be this like big bounce back and all of a sudden we're going to be selling as much wine as we were in 21, 22. It's just not going to happen. It's going to be this slow, methodical crawl. It's how markets work, right? When you see these crashes, it's going to take a while for it to build back up to where it was. Now, you still might be, ahead of where you were a few years ago, but if you're like a lot of companies that have been banking on high consumption, you have all this inventory, you've spent a lot of money, just like we have, and now you're kind of stuck in this spot where, money is really tight. We're bottling some of the biggest vintages that we've ever made, and we're trying to, scrape the bottoms of our barrels to find money to make it all happen. Like that's where so many people are in the world right now. You're still at the kind of the top level of the alcohol industry. You're seeing plenty of mergers and acquisitions, between MUMM going to Trinchero, I think. Kenwood got sold recently to Corbel. Four Roses was just acquired by Gallo from Kieran. Like there's all kinds of like moving and shaking going on in and around the industry. And especially at kind of the big brand level, this is one of those moments kind of in the market, right, where it's like if you have the money to buy, you buy because you're buying at a low point, right? Like it's just buy low, sell high. That's the rule, right? That's what I've been told my whole life, I'm pretty sure. That's what you see a lot of people trying to do. But I don't really know if I don't really know, and no one really knows. Like, we're all shaking our crystal balls out here trying to sort out exactly what's going on. There's certainly this kind of like stagnation. I think that, and I think Silicon Valley Bank, as well as maybe some others, have echoed this idea, is that whatever bottom we think we were going to hit, we think we've hit it. And now it's a matter of building everything back up to a more reasonable spot. And that's going to take some, you're going to have to be incredibly frugal. You're going to have to really budget and be on top of your projections. You might have to be like us and be cutting production, be like, all right, we're going to start saving some expenses and we're going to, figure it out. We have friends of ours that are taking years off from winemaking. They're like, yep, we've got plenty of inventory lined up. If 3 years from now we don't need it, based on these projections, I think we're good. There are certain wines that we're not going to be making for that same reason, because we've got plenty of other vintages left in the cellar. It's like, well, in 3 years from now, we have these other things in our library that we can fall back on. So we're going to put a pause on certain projects and, continue growing from there. So there's a lot of, tough decisions being made to make sure that these businesses survive. Like, the one thing that always surprises me is that we see these businesses every once in a while that just, kind of continue forging ahead without really stopping to think about what they're doing. There is this just, we're just going to keep going. We're going to keep producing. We're going to keep doing the same old thing that we've been doing and expect different results. And, that's the definition of insanity. You look at that from a 36,000 foot view back here, and you're like, oh, that's where you're fucking up. Got it. You're just ignorant. The blinders are on, and you're just moving forward in the direction you think is forward, even though you're going the wrong direction, right? You're going forward in a direction, but it's not necessarily the correct one, right? And I think that's where some folks have very simply gotten overextended. There's been a lack of kind of introspection when it comes to the wine industry. And I truly think that this is one of the key talking points that no one in the world of wine is really talking about. I got to write this out. I'm about to make a great point, you all. Oh my God. And this is something that we've talked about all the time, on the show, especially last year. It's what plenty of pundits in the, sphere of podcasting and social media will say, is that Gen X isn't drinking enough. There's too many ready to drink cocktails. Prices are too high. The economy sucks, whatever. There are these moments that people are, the wine industry in particular, and I don't know about other alcohol industries, but the wine industry in particular has done a great job of pointing the finger at everybody else and not looking at themselves and saying, hey, is it me? Am I the problem? Is it me? How's that Taylor Swift song go? Something like that, right? So, there's a confluence of factors, right, that have contributed to why the alcohol industry has gone the direction it's gone. In wine specifically, and frankly in other categories as well, I see too many people pointing fingers at other things. Our distributors are the distribution system's broken. Oh yeah, Gen Z is not ordering enough wine. Our our wine clubs, no one wants to be part of a wine club anymore. Like, people aren't visiting Napa. Like, all right, cool. You've identified the problems, but you're being problem oriented, not solution oriented, right? So how do we fix that? For us, 10 years ago in 2016, a group of friends and I decided to start traveling for this very reason. We said, hey, we're all working for small brands. People aren't coming to Napa as much. We're seeing a little bit of a downturn right now. Let's hit the road. Let's start doing events on the road. And for the last 10 years, we've created arguably what has been the most successful traveling group of wineries in Napa, which is an outstanding thing. We've gone through some very good times together. We've gone through some tougher times like we have more recently together. And we've worked very hard to try to meet people where they are. Again, being solution oriented. I look at the current state of the industry as an industry problem, not a consumer problem. Now, there are certain things that kind of hamstring us into doing what we do. I mean, we could talk about how expensive it is to make Napa Cabernet, for example. There's a certain expectation of what it needs to be. The fruit is a certain price. The barrels that we buy have only gone up in price due to tariffs and things of that nature. It's an expensive product. So a Napa cab at less than like 60 or $80 is really, really hard to find. And very typically, you're going to be looking more at that, 95 to probably 125. And of course, they go way north from there, as we are all well aware, right? There was a gentleman that came in, friend of ours that came into the winery the other day and says, rattled off a lot of the same stuff, like, oh, Gen Z's just not drinking, they're smoking too much dope, which I'm like, number one, if you're a pothead, I don't think alcohol was your thing. And, everyone's got their vice. Like, I'm not trying to compete with weed here. Like, that's not what I'm trying to do, right? But echoed all these sentiments that I just kind of rattled off. And the thing that I think about probably more is what people's expectations of, say, like Napa wine is. And I mentioned that with, Cabernet specifically, like the new barrels we have to buy, the aging time, all that stuff. There's a reason why I think there's this gap in the market right now of people just not getting into wine as much. We've talked about this before, but I'll echo it one more time, is that, beer and spirits outsell wine 2 or 3 to 1. Like, we are dead last, and it's not particularly close in this country. So people say, like, yeah, but, we consume more wine as a country than other countries. And you're like, yeah, but per capita, that's a different story, right? You have, like, that you're latching on to the wrong statistic here. So how do we, as a wine industry, get more people into wine? That's the question for me, because if beer and liquor are outselling us 2 or 3 to 1, that means there's a lot of people consuming alcohol that aren't necessarily consuming wine in certain situations, right? And you could say, hey, like, if I go to a baseball game, or I'm wearing my Sharks hat right now, you get to the boy aquarium, as my wife now calls it. It's one of those things, like, yeah, you're probably having a beer, like, their wine selection is, maybe not that great. And this is what, I touched on with this friend of ours at the winery, is that, yeah, good wines are pretty good, but there's a lot of mass-produced wines out there that are pretty bad. And the entry-level stuff that used to get people into wine just isn't good enough anymore. There's a quality problem there, I think, personally, where you have these, very sweet, very kind of rudimentary wines that this is not a knock on them. They're meant to be very simple, very easy to drink. You could throw a little Sprite in them to spritz them up. I don't care if it's your white Zin. I don't care if you're throwing your crappy, like, red blend, whatever it is. But the issue is that beer can just be yummier and easier and less intimidating. Spirits and cocktails can just be yummier, easier, less intimidating. And that intimidation factor when it comes to wine obviously plays a huge role, right? So there's, again, like, this crazy kind of like confluence of things that have all come together. And the wine industry, in my humble opinion, needs to be way more introspective about how we're doing things and why we're doing them. This is an industry that hates to change. It does not like to adjust. It does not like to move. It does not like to shake. It likes to forge ahead with how things have been done for generations. There's tradition, and this industry is very much rooted in that tradition and rarely likes to adapt to what's going on. There are still people to this day. There are still people that show up at hospitality forums and conferences and things that would be like, how big of a deal is it that, like, we don't do that much social media? And I'm terrible about posting, but at least we're active every once in a while, throwing stuff and, recording podcasts and things of that nature. But there are people that still have no idea, like, how many, like, should we really be sending that many email campaigns? How dialed in should our webs, like, our online shop be? Like, should it be, like, what should we be doing? Like, there are people that still are, like, trying to figure out the internet in our industry. So, like, if that's where we are, we're easily a couple of decades behind many other industries. And that is not a question. There's no way anyone out there can debate me on that. We just are. Now, there are certain brands, maybe I like to think ourselves and others, that are trying to push the limits and kind of like, hey, let's come on, guys, let's go. Let's keep it moving forward. But there are a ton of people that refuse to let go of just how things have been done. You know, I had a conversation with some folks in the hospitality, kind of more restaurant world, and I tossed this idea by them because it's the one thing that I think about too when it comes to like making wine more affordable, more accessible, right? Because I think the issue, and I mentioned this already with making Cabernet and Napa, it's just an expensive thing. Like we can't. It's really difficult for us to make the style of wine that many of you want and do it on a dime. There are certain wines that do it, and we started making our Diversum Cabernet and the white wine that are very, I think, reasonably priced for what they are. But you're still talking about a $25 bottle of white wine and a $65 bottle of Cabernet. They're still not super affordable, I guess. They're not these kind of value labels, right? And the issue is that it kind of fades in and out. But this like $30 and up, roughly, to like maybe it's like $40 and up to around $80 can be kind of like a dead zone from a wine pricing standpoint. Like it's not priced high enough to be like nice wine, and it's not priced low enough to be value wine. It's caught in this weird like vortex that it can't get out of. And even when we've tried making some of these wines, we just haven't been able to sell them in a volume. And this is something I hear from plenty of folks, is that we've tried to create these wines that are a little bit more value driven. Yeah, it's not going to be $19.99 or like $15.99 at your local, insert wine shop here, but we're trying to make something that is more affordable and more of that Tuesday night pizza wine. But nothing's really caught on yet. And I don't know if that's a stylistic issue because these wines aren't seeing as much new oak. They're not being aged as long. The blending's going to be different. Like they are more simplistic wines. They're not as complex. They're not as intense or maybe interesting as kind of the nicer wines we make as an industry. And, I do, there is this little bit of like, man, all right, we need to troubleshoot this. Like how can we bring people into some of these more affordable styles of winemaking and be like, hey, yeah, it's a $60 bottle of Napa Cab. Yeah, it's not going to taste like the reserve of whoever that you love, but it's a good bottle of wine for a Tuesday night when you don't want to spend $120, right? Like that's I think the realm of opportunity that I see. And more people, I believe, are getting into that. It's just a matter of continuing to kind of hammer it home. That's what we're trying to do. I think that's what others are trying to do, is find these, great values within certain appellations and regions, whether that's Napa or otherwise, and share it with you. There was someone that brought this, I can't remember which podcast I was listening to. I wish I could give it a shout out, but it was just a clip, that I saw. And the question was posed, like, for wine bars, restaurants of that nature, like, are drinks just priced too high? Like, when you're paying $18 to $22 for a cocktail, I mean, are you really going to, like, if you have two of those, like, all of a sudden this starts to be a really expensive night before you even have food, And, obviously restaurants make their money very typically on their alcohol sales. But if you're only selling one drink at, $20 versus two or three versus two at 15, I don't know what those margins shake out to be, but does that make more sense? Right? Because, and we talk about this in the wine world, right? That if you're buying a wine by the glass, if that glass of wine is $25, that's typically what that restaurant paid for the entire bottle. Because they have to hedge their bet, saying like, okay, if one person orders a glass of this and no one does for 2 days, we have to dump it out. So we need to at least pay for the bottle, right? But if they price that glass at, $20 and ate into their margins a little bit, but they sold 2 glasses versus just the one and brought in $40 versus 25, like, does that make up that difference? Again, I don't have any restaurant's spreadsheet in front of me to help sort that out. That's part of where my head goes, as I said earlier. Like, let's not blame other people, but coming to Napa, like, we're not on the front line of bringing people into wine anymore. Like, we're just not. People aren't coming out here in droves like they used to. People are getting introduced to wine, beer, spirits, cocktails where they live, around the country. So there is a frontline kind of mentality to this, is that if we can make, and find production techniques and things that we can do to make wine, hopefully less expensive, sell it to a distributor or a retailer or a restaurant for, less money. They can, provide something that is, nice and affordable to their clientele and sell more volume of it, like, does that math check out? Really? Like, does it? Because let's say, if a bottle of wine, because we all know a bottle of wine at a restaurant is sometimes 2.5, 3, or 4 times as expensive as what you're going to pay, at at the winery. And then you have people that are bringing in like corkage fees. Like, why do you think corkage fees and bringing in your own wine has become so popular? It's because wine at restaurants is fucking expensive. Like, it better be damn good. It better be something I know is going to be good and exciting, because we're paying out the ass for this. And I understand you got bills to pay, and the bar program in this restaurant, that's what keeps it afloat. But when a bottle of wine is $60 and I'm paying $1.50 for it, that sucks. Like, it just sucks. Like, it's hard to get into wine that way. So I think there is a middle ground to be had there. Again, I'm no restaurateur, but from the supplier, the winery side here, it feels as though it's disjointed and we're just not on the same page all the time. And I think that we could encourage more people to explore new wines, explore new beverages and things, if we gave them the ability to do so. Because what 20-something is buying a $180 bottle of something off a wine list? I mean, there might be a handful of them, realistically. We do also think about that generational shift, right? Of, it's going to take time for people to get stable in their careers, to start going out and affording nicer dinners and nicer bottles of wine. And when it comes to Napa specifically, there's a little bit of a lag time until the next generation gets into wine, especially Napa wine, because it is just so damn expensive, right? Anyway, it is as I mentioned, it's kind of this confluence of things. I don't think it's purely a restaurant retail issue. I don't think it's a distributor issue. I don't think it is a consumer issue. I think it is, a confluence of some of these things. However, the wine industry and us on the winery side have done a very good job of blaming other people historically for our problems. And we should be trying to do more. And I think there are a good swath of us that are actively trying to do that. It's just a matter of figuring out like what keys into people. We talked about like social media and how to connect with people and like what makes, people are looking for things that are more authentic and getting to know the people behind the brands they shop for now. Like, that's all really good stuff. But again, like we talked about the tradition of the wine industry, like marketing in the wine industry sucks. Like, it's bad. It's the same old stuff that's been done forever in terms of like points and rating systems and reviews. And, we do a little bit of it. If you watch like the blending session we did the other day, it was, it's me sitting there sipping on wine. Like, watching someone drink wine is boring. It just is. The fact that so many people liked that video and watched it already is like, okay, like, did it get the most traction in the world? But no, it's one of our more popular episodes we've done recently, and all I was doing was sitting there drinking wine, which I feel like it's like watching paint dry, but I'm glad some of you enjoyed it. So good on you. But like wine marketing, like we talked about like the Michelin Guide and how they're going to start getting in and like rating wines, and I'm like, is this really innovating? Is this actually pushing the industry forward and doing something that is going to help us? Or are we just trying to, plug holes in the dam with our fingers here? Because here's a dirty little secret. I don't know if I've ever like mentioned this before. I mean, if you've been listening for a while, the bone to pick I have with, kind of wine media and critics and things, because I'd find them just so out of touch and frankly not doing the industry a whole lot of good at this point. Like, net neutral. Like, they're not a bad thing, but they're not doing anything to really drive, I think, consumption and introducing people to wine in a I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how to word it, but you know what I mean. Like, it's stale. It's stale. It needs to change. We need an overhaul. Because here's the thing. This is the dirty little secret. Because we saw at the end of the year, and beginning of the new year, like, people start posting all the ratings and reviews they got. We had friends of ours that, got 100-point scores and all this stuff. But here's the dirty little secret. And if you remember, if you listened to last week, there's been a handful of, events that we've been at recently with like around, other winemakers and things of that nature. Of my winemaking friends and colleagues, anyone who's in the cellar making that's what they do. They're the winemaker. They're doing this kind of stuff. I don't know a single one, certainly none of my immediate like close friends in winemaking. And as far as I know, none of the colleagues and kind of more acquaintances in winemaking that I don't know a single one that cares about a score they got. Not one of them. Nobody cares. I mean, they're like, yeah, it's nice to be, it's nice to get some kudos. Like, it's a great gold star to put on the on a plaque somewhere. But none of us care about it. So what does that like? So why is it that we as an industry kind of continue to like beat this dead horse? Right? Again, like nothing I'm not trying to take away from anybody who achieves that score. Like, good on you. Like, I'm sure it's a great measuring stick, and I'm sure you're happy and whatever. And you can feel free to call me, bitter or whatever, because we don't get our wines rated and reviewed and we've never gotten a score. So feel free to, address my bias as you see fit. But when there's an enormous swath of the wine professionals that I know who do not care a single bit about the wine scores they get, what does that tell you about where the market is and how we're driving it, right? Because for me, the way I think about it is that you guys out there that are trying to get into wine, trying to learn more, is that you want to learn from the people that are boots on the ground. Like the critics and the wine writers, like great. They can be an amazing resource as you're getting into wine, as you're learning about it. It's fairly finite because they've just been kind of doing the same thing for decades. There's not been a lot of innovation since Robert Parker started rating wines with the 100-point score, right? That hasn't changed a whole lot. I don't care if Michelin comes in and starts giving grape clusters instead of stars. Like, it's the same thing, just rinsed and repeated, right? So the way I'm looking at it, again, trying to be, a problem solver within the wine industry, is what really matters to us and how can we translate some of that feeling to you guys? Is it the connections that we have personally within the industry, the community that I talk so much about? If you want, we ended last episode with that, on that high point of the community and how important it is. Is that it? Is it, is it knowing more about the actual processes, kind of the geeky, like how do we get a wine from grape to bottle? Is that more important? Is it, the food pairing side of it? Like, hey, if I'm going to be entertaining, I need to know, if I'm going to buy your wine, I need to know what it goes with so that when I have friends over, I can act accordingly and cook something or order something out that is going to be delicious with it. And I think it's all of those things, right? There's going to be this kind of sliding scale of what makes wine interesting to you personally, and we have to be there for you. And I don't think that a arbitrary number in a publication does any of that. They can wax very poetically about some of that stuff, maybe a little bit about the tasting notes, food pairing suggestions. Most that I see don't talk much about the production methods, where it's actually from, and they don't and some of them do talk a little bit about the people behind it, but it's hard to fit all that information in like a short paragraph blurb. There aren't these kind of longer, and some of them do like longer features and interviews and things, or focusing on certain categories. But I don't know, it just feels like there's this there's a little bit of this disconnect there that doesn't quite get us over the hump of getting people introduced to wine in a really, truly kind of meaningful way. And I think that's what we're missing a little bit. I don't know many people that get together and share a bottle of wine that have a bad time, unless you have that one friend who's a mean drunk, and that's, that can be a problem. But hopefully that doesn't happen that often. But it is about bringing people together in the community. It's not about, spreading people apart based on ratings and prestige. It's not about alienating people with, outrageous price points and geeky stuff that only a sommelier could possibly explain. It's not about us trying to, hide in our caves and just be like, don't worry about how the wine's made. Well, it's good stuff. You should drink it. It's about being open. It's about being transparent. It's about bringing people into the world of wine and, figuring out what is important to you guys. There are plenty of times as we're hosting tastings at the winery where we talk about, almost anything but wine. People just we just want to taste through some things. We know what we like, and we just see where the conversation goes. There are plenty of wine geeks that show up and say, "I need to know about that barrel. Why do you use that one? Why do you use that one? What's the blend on this? Why was it 2.5%? That is 0.5% really make a difference?" And we can get really nerdy about it. But it is about connecting with you guys in a meaningful way. And I think what the wine industry does more often than not, unfortunately, is they try and paint a broad stroke. Hey, we got to get these ratings. Hey, we have to use these vineyards. Hey, we have to be in these restaurants and retail shops. Hey, we have to put this on our website. Hey, we need these kinds of tasting notes. And they don't do enough to get to know a lot of their consumer base. And unfortunately, I think for the wine industry as a whole, that has hurt more than it's helped. And we're going to have to do something about it. And there are many of us that are trying to get out there, trying to bring you guys into our world, kicking and screaming if we must. But we're trying, We'll see. We'll see. I don't think there is a, broad stroke brush to this problem of getting folks into wine or the industry woes that we're facing at any level of the chain, whether it's us on the winery side, distributors, retail shops, restaurants. This crosses everything. The blame game that we play with one another, even on you guys sometimes. Unfortunately, like Gen Z is taking the brunt of it right now because they're not into wine, and that's not true. That's just not true. The reality is that we haven't given them a good enough opportunity to get into wine. That's the problem. And that's something that across any age range, any part of the supply chain here, that's what we need to work on. That's where I see the most opportunity when it comes down to it. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Wind Up Podcast. I'll be back next time to continue the conversation. Until then, be sure to like and subscribe to the show. Follow us on our social networks. That's YouTube, Instagram, the Book of Face, and the social network formerly known as Twitter. The handle for all of those is at MTGA Wines. Submit topics for the show on our website. That's mtgawines.com. Just scroll down to the bottom of that homepage and you'll see the form to fill out and submit questions our way. Until next time, have a great day, week, weekend, month, whatever the case may be, and we'll see you next time here on the Wind Up Podcast. Cheers.